Hello, good evening and welcome to this evening's 30-minute webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. My name's Caroline Ward and I'm Head of Communication and Insight for RDA UK. Tonight's webinar is all about encouraging school groups back to RDA. Now, we know this is a sticking point for many groups, so I hope you pick up some useful tips and feel more confident about approaching schools with your restart plans. I'm delighted that we'll be joined by Sandra O'Connell from Ashmount School in Loughborough. Sandra is the coordinator between Ashmount School and the RDA group. Sandra will be taking us through the steps and processes that they went through to bring pupils back to RDA last year, some of the challenges and potential stumbling blocks that they faced, how they prepared pupils for returning to RDA, and what it was like for students on that first day back. Ashmount RDA is hosted at Dawn Whitmore Kirby's Yard in Nottinghamshire. Dawn is coach at the group and also regional coach for North Midlands. So Dawn is also kindly joining us this evening, and she will be on hand alongside RDA Chief Executive Ed Bracher to answer any questions you may have. So on that, there is a Q&A which you can see on your screen. So if you do have any questions that occur to you during the session, pop them in the Q&A and we will try and answer questions at the end of the session if we have time. So let's get started. Ed and Dawn, I'll ask you please to turn your screens off and mute while I say hello to Sandra. Hello.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for inviting me to your webinar. It's a pleasure to be able to come and talk and hopefully encourage other schools to begin riding again.
Great, thank you very much. So just tell us just a little bit of scene setting about Ashmount School and your role there.
Okay, so Ashmount is a special school in Loughborough, as you've already said. We cater for children from 4 to 19 years old. We've got about 180 odd pupils on roll at the moment. We moved to a new building, I think it was in 2014, because we outgrew our old building and we are already bursting at the seams again now. I'm sure other schools have the same issues. I'm the sixth form teacher at Ashmount School, but for the last 11 years I've been the RDA coordinator within school. Because we have so many students or so many pupils, sorry, I might refer to them as students because they're older, so I tend to call the young people I work with students rather than pupils, but predominantly I'm talking about any of the pupils within school. So we used to ride predominantly the older children, but as the school grew in size, we decided to make the riding experience more available for the upper primary children and the key stage 3 children, so really for children aged between sort of 8 and 14. We do have other special riding events that we put on sometimes where the other children, so for instance I took some of my sixth formers on a hack through the RDA, but predominantly we ride on a Friday morning and we take a group of riders each sort of 6 weeks. We tend to take eight pupils out riding.
Great. And what's it been like for the school this year?
So obviously it's been a really tough year for everybody. We can't say it hasn't been. I think that there's been times when everybody's struggled in one way or another. I feel quite fortunate because I've been able to carry on working throughout. So the school has remained open. Part of the remit of entry to a special school is that a young person has to have an educational healthcare plan. And when the government announced the lockdown and closures of schools, it was decided that schools would remain open for children of key workers and for children who fell into vulnerable groups and any child with an educational healthcare plan falls within that vulnerable group. Obviously, some of them aren't as vulnerable, but that was the sort of caveat that was put out there. So our school remained open. Obviously, a lot of parents were very concerned and worried, like everybody was at the start of the first lockdown, and indeed now. So they chose to take their children out of school. So we ended up initially with sort of late March through to most of the summer, with a couple of bubbles, a primary bubble and a secondary bubble. And slowly, as children returned to school following May half term, those bubbles then became 2, 4, 6, until we're at now. So we've got over 90% of our, I think actually about 95% of our children back at the moment. And when we came back to school in September, we came back into tutor group bubbles, and that's where we are at the moment.
Great. We've been joined by my cat. So tell me about that moment where you went from obviously not doing any off-site activities, or that even being something that was possible, to thinking that you'd like to try and get back up and running with RDA.
Okay, so obviously, whilst we still had children coming to school and we were using school facilities as much as we could, we were very much keeping children safe within our school environment. So one of the first things that we do a lot of community work with our children and young people, because it's essential life skills, and also a lot of the children, especially those children on the autistic spectrum, we feel it's really important to get them to integrate and used to integrating in the local community and society as a whole. So we're really keen to get activities out of the school environment happening as soon as we could. Obviously, the head teacher had to enforce and follow COVID guidance, the laws and guidance that the government was setting down, and obviously also DFE guidance that was then fed through County Hall. So the first thing that we were able to do was to go out on the local tracks and trails within school, and we've got a forest school area that's a short walk away. So we got permission to go up to the forest school area. And then the Leicestershire children go back at the end of August. So the first couple of weeks, we were very much about settling the students back in school, and just taking them within the very, very local environment. And then a couple of weeks in, once the children were more settled, I had a conversation with Dawn, and Dawn invited me up to the riding school to go and have a look, so we could see if it potentially was possible to then go back to school and ask if we could return to riding. And that's exactly what I did. So I went back to school. I spoke to the head teacher. He checked initially with County Hall just to see if it'd be okay. And then he said, yeah, work towards getting riding back and happening. So everybody was really excited about that, because it was really the first activity that we were resuming that we hadn't. We've got a hydro swimming pool at school, and we haven't been able to use that at all. So even some of the great facilities that we have within our building, we've not been able to use. So the fact that we've been able to go out and begin one of our valued activities has been fantastic.
And what did you need to see at Dawn's to persuade you to be able to persuade the head that it was going to be safe? Because this is still quite early on in this process, so you would have been wanting to be pretty hot on the hygiene and the safety side of things.
Yeah, so the first meeting that I had with Dawn, I'm quite lucky because I don't live that far away from the riding school, and actually I ended up going up to the riding school in the summer, so I could see some of the systems that Dawn had put in place. But obviously I was just going as an individual visiting, and predominantly to knock on Dawn's door. So when I went up to the riding school, Dawn gave me a tour basically and showed me all of the procedures that she'd had to put in place. And whilst we were walking around and she was showing me how she altered the environment to be more COVID friendly, which began with sort of hand sanitizing at the gate, right through to the different zones that the riders were using, the different lanes that they use, entrances and exits from the riding arena. So really it was just to see if it'd be possible, if it'd be manageable to get the group going back. And of course it was very well organised, so as long as there was enough staff with the children that were going to access the activity, then we knew that we could do it. It was just a case then of, then the head teacher questioned me, asked me what we needed to put in place, and obviously he said that I needed to do a risk assessment. I had to do a risk assessment anyway for the RDA, as I'd found out, but we always do a risk assessment when each group go riding. It was just making sure that I'd considered COVID guidance from Dawn, and that it was really helpful because Dawn had already formed her risk assessments. So obviously a lot of the information that was in her risk assessment needed to be mirrored within our risk assessments. So I think it was about the 14th of September that we had an Ashmount RDA meeting, and at the meeting there were representatives from committee, trustees and a volunteer, and it was just a case of there saying, does everybody think it's possible? And then Dawn talking through the procedures again, and me saying that I've been up and it is possible. Dawn's walked me through it, and also Dawn shared the risk assessments with me, and then we shared them at that point, just to discuss the key changes, which predominantly was obviously hand sanitizing and social distancing.
And were there any barriers that the school yourselves had to overcome in order to facilitate kids being able to come back? Yeah,
so there were quite a few barriers really. I think one of the trickiest barriers, I mentioned that we're currently in tutor group bubbles. So within our secondary department, we work within tutor groups, which are mixed ability. And there's 12 students and usually 5 or 6 staff members in those groups. And then what we would do in secondary, as in mainstream secondary, we would go into different teaching groups then for lessons normally. We weren't doing that, we aren't doing that, we aren't able to do that. So we're staying as a tutor group bubble. And because it's mixed ability, there were some limitations there, because one of the remits for coming back was that students had to be able to sit on a horse independently, because there wouldn't be sidewalkers as such. So I had to look for a bubble that had children that could sit independently. Another thing was that the children had to have ridden before. So it had to also include children that, so not only sort of more able-bodied children that have been riding before. I had to think of pick a group really where there was an experienced member of staff who had gone to taken a group to horse riding before, and also that staff needed to be a bus driver, minibus driver. So there were quite a few things to consider. There were 2 potential groups, but there was one group that really stood out because one of my great colleagues, Nick Allison, he actually does he oversees the risk assessments that we do within school. So the fact that his group fitted, or his bubble fitted the bill, if you like, made it easier to some degree for me, because anything that I wouldn't necessarily think of, he would question anyway. But fortunately, by the time I talked and worked through with Dawn, we kind of got that side of it right anyway. So there were quite a few barriers in that respect. Yeah.
Yes, and that travel one is an extra element, isn't it? And when we spoke, I think, before about that, obviously meant because you could have fewer people on your transport than you normally would. So then you're sort of a bit split as a staff team, making sure you've got enough staff back at school and being able to accompany kids to come to RDA. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So knowing that we would need to start, so usually we would bring 8 riders, and 4 staff would come with those riders, and they would be out of a teaching group, which would be smaller anyway. But obviously we were coming out of the bubble. So we needed to bring 4 staff because we needed potentially 3 staff to sidewalk, or 2 to be with the children in the arena and 2 to be with the children that weren't riding, because we ride 3 at a time. They switch over. So that obviously then was leaving a number of students who were less ambulant, and potentially with more complex care needs, with fewer staff. We were lucky because the head teacher very much supports. Well, riding is a fantastic activity. So any school that's involved in riding knows that it is worthwhile, actually making sure that you can fund staffing appropriately. And the head teacher immediately agreed to, if he needed to buy in some staff to join the bubble on Friday mornings when we have our riding session. So that all worked out. But you were right in saying the minibus was a slight issue, because the children in school belong to 2 bubbles. They belong to a tutor group bubble in school, and they belong to a transport bubble. Most of our children are transported in minibuses or taxis, and some of the taxis are shared taxis. So they've got 2 bubbles, and if either bubble had a COVID issue, whether it was the bus or the group, then that took those bubbles out. So we had to do a minibus plan. We had to make sure that children who shared the travel bubble sat closer together on the minibus, and children who weren't in their travel bubble sat further apart. And because obviously in a classroom you can socially distance more. A classroom is much bigger than a minibus, obviously. So we had to plan it all really carefully, and obviously staff would wear appropriate PPE for the situation. Obviously we were breaking the social distancing rules within the minibus. So I know Nick thought very carefully about and did a minibus plan. But once he'd done that initial plan, then it's in place to use with that group every time they go riding. So although that was an obstacle, it was a small obstacle that Nick was able to overcome. And
yeah, that's really interesting. And I think what's really useful there for our groups is just that sort of perhaps better understanding of what schools have been going through, because all those kinds of considerations that you've had to make there will be the kinds of things that all schools will be going through, I'm sure. And how did you prepare students themselves for coming back after what would have been a break for them?
I think there was a lot of apprehension of students returning to school, but I think that apprehension was, and some anxiety. I think some of that had rightly come from parents, and being picked up in that respect. But as far as coming back to riding, so we already said that part of the choice of pupils to ride was that the RDA had said that they needed to be children who'd been riding previously. So once we said that they were the group that was going right, once we told them, they were really excited. And actually, that bubble has several quite lively young men in it who really love horse riding. They love their interactions with the horses. They love the energy that's exerted whilst they're riding. And so they're really excited. Yeah. So they knew exactly what they were doing and where they were going. We did explain to them. I know Nick did quite a bit of work with them talking about the PPE that we were wearing in school, and the PPE, especially masks, that they saw people wearing outside of school and those supermarkets or wherever. I know he said that it would have to be different at the stables, and we'd have to follow the set guidance, and that some of the volunteers would be wearing PPE equipment. So they weren't any surprises, so they knew what was happening. And actually, it's really nice knowing that when you ask children to be responsible, the majority of time they step up to the mark. So they actually were a lot calmer, I believe, on that first visit. I didn't actually take them. I wish I had been able to take them. Unfortunately, I do a lot of the coordinating, a lot of the paperwork, but don't actually get a lot of the enjoyment from the actual activity itself. but I know they were really excited about going, and I know that they were very aware of the fact that they were the first group to go out and resume a normal activity. So that they were excited about that.
And I know you say you weren't there, but what was the feedback on that first day back?
So the good thing is, because I coordinate the riding, I do always go, and especially after the first return to ride, or the first ride of a new group, I always go and find them, and they arrive back at school just as lunchtime starts. So I'm able to go down to reception and kind of greet them back in. And there was a lot of excitement, and it was really nice to hear feedback from the staff as well, who said that it ran smoothly. I don't think anybody particularly knew what to expect. Obviously, I knew what to expect because I'd been and visited. Dawn knew obviously what to expect because she was at her riding school, and the students usually go there, and she'd also had some other individuals riding. But for the staff, they said that it was all really well organised, and the students really enjoyed it. And in fact, not from the first session, but having spoken to Nick, my colleague, more recently about the group returning to riding again after Easter, and we're hoping to get back on Friday the 16th of April. Will be our first return to riding post this lockdown. And he said it was great how a couple of the students who needed sidewalkers, who we kind of gave that extra responsibility to, and there was one particular young man that during normal PE lessons, his coordination's not that great, and Nick said that actually he was steering the horse really well, and his balance was very, very good on the saddle. And so actually I think the fact that again we've given that bit of responsibility, a bit more responsibility, a bit more freedom to the students, that they've actually taken that on board, and yeah, made us proud.
Oh, that's great to hear. And so what would you say to a group who was wondering whether or not they should get going, perhaps almost particularly now when perhaps there's a mood that there's a sort of easing off of restrictions sometime ahead, so maybe we'll just sit tight? What do you feel about that?
So I don't like to say this, but I think it's the reality that COVID is going to be around for quite a while longer. I know that the other day the government ministers were talking about a possibility, and the medics were talking about a possibility of another wave, either autumn or winter time. So you talk in the autumn term. So I would just say go ahead and do it. Don't wait for restrictions to drop, because potentially it could be another year. It could be this time next year before that even happens. I mean, let's hope. Gosh, let's hope that things ease a lot sooner than that. But I think the reality is we've got to work with COVID. I think a lot of the procedures that have been put in place at riding schools is going to stay. A lot of the procedures that have been put in place in schools is going to be there for a long time. Some of it good, it's good perhaps that we've upped hygiene practices, and we're encouraging children to hand wash more frequently, and staff as well, of course. But I would say go for it. Don't wait. If you are a riding school, get in touch with the school. If you are a school, get in touch with your riding school. I know everybody works differently, but please don't wait. Yes, there's quite a little bit of hard work just to get going to start with, but once you've done that hard work, you're away. It did take some sitting down, it did take some thinking about, it did take some working through risk assessments, particularly to get those right, and more importantly, not just to complete the paperwork, to actually share it and make sure other people took ownership and were aware of the risk assessments that had been produced. But once they're there, and they're an ongoing thing, but once they're there, that's the hard work out of the way. It's a bit like the bus plan. Once it's there, you use the same plan week on week on week on week. You may have to do a tweak every week or so, but that initial effort it by far outweighs, you know, not going. I mean, to get children back riding, to get an activity, a great activity like this going, the effort by far outweighs, you know, by far outweighs the benefits to the students. It is absolutely great.
Sure. And I was particularly struck by what you were saying about how at the moment there are so many restrictions on other activities that your students can do, that perhaps people think riding might be a bit of a sort of nice to have extra, but actually I was struck by, you know, when you were saying the only other thing that's available at the moment is forest schools, there are a lot of restrictions. So where schools, you know, schools are actually quite itching to find those things that they can get back into doing, particularly when it comes to healthy outdoor activity.
So I think I mean, we are doing outdoor PE sessions and things like that, and we're very lucky because we have, for instance, we had a gentleman in doing archery with some of our children out in the playground, but it's all obviously it's all bubble based. And in a special school, unless you've ability grouped your bubble from the off, which we chose not to for various reasons, then you do end up having some restrictions about what you're doing, or you have to work with half your group at a time, and obviously the other half will be doing a different activity. I think the good thing about horse riding for us is it's safe, because you're going from the school environment to the riding environment. You're taking the same bubble, the same children, the same staff. You're just changing the environment. So to me, it's a lot safer than perhaps taking my own children to a supermarket, because I can't control who else is going to be there. Obviously, you know, I can manage myself and manage my children within that environment, but actually I don't, there's going to be so many other people from so many other areas who have perhaps seen so many other people during their day job. So that to me is, you know, a much less controlled environment than just simply moving one bubble to a different activity. So I think, you know, riding, as far as we're concerned at school, is a really safe activity to do.
That's really, really good to hear. Thank you very, very much. That's brilliant. If I can, I'd like to bring Dawn and Ed back in, and we can just have a look at whether we've got a couple of questions. So that's, I can see you, Ed.
So we've got a couple of similar questions, really, which may be best addressed to Dawn, but really asking about the sidewalkers and whether they were in the bubbles, or whether these were riders, Dawn, who didn't need sidewalkers, or how you as a group were managing that.
Okay, the sidewalkers we actually tried to work without, and the only people that had sidewalkers were the children that had staff from school. So they're people who've actually been riding many times and have been trained to sidewalk. So we didn't actually, there's some of the children I probably would have had sidewalkers in the session pre-COVID, because the helpers had come. But obviously I limited how many people in the school, and we have no more than 15 in the school when we're working. So that includes myself. I actually did have a person who was a spotter, because I've got children who are riding with a leader and the leader can't look at the child. So I actually had another person who was a spotter. So while I was doing, in case something happened when I couldn't see it, and like when feet come out of stirrups, because the leader can't put them back in. So that was actually quite handy. And then the member of staff went to do that. But the other thing that we had was when we taught the helpers to lead, they found it very difficult not to look at the riders. So when we had 2 training sessions for the helpers before they came back, just to see if they were happy, because not everyone was happy to come back to do it. But when I taught the helpers to lead at 1 meter, they actually, the horses have been absolutely fantastic, and there wasn't a problem with that. But I found they kept looking behind at the rider all the time, and obviously you want to stay forward. So when we practiced, they practiced with an anorak with a hood up, or a hoodie. Well, when you're actually leading and you turn around and look, you end up looking at your own hood. And they actually realised how often they look at the riders when they were doing that. So that helped the helpers quite a bit. And I think some of the helpers were a little apprehensive about having a rider on with no sidewalkers to start off with, but now they can see the benefits of it. And by the end of the sessions we had before Christmas, we actually had taken 2 of them off lead rein totally. So that was brilliant.
Sandra, I think you were telling me earlier about a rider who particularly benefited from that sense of extra independence and progress as a result of that, which was really nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as Dawn said, you know, we usually would put volunteers as sidewalkers, and if we have a lot of volunteers, then each pony can be allocated a sidewalker, even if they don't really. We don't use sidewalkers if it, well, I say we. Dawn doesn't use a sidewalker; she doesn't need to use a sidewalker. But if there's somebody there, then they can be there on hand. I think the fact that we couldn't, and we only had the school staff who were sidewalking, then it did mean that yeah, we had to encourage the children to be more independent. I suppose part of our risk assessing in that respect, I feel like I've spoken about risk assessing a lot this evening, but a part of our risk assessing there is trusting, and I suppose, you know, saying this might go wrong, but we're gonna, it's worth the risk. And actually, as a result of that, at the end of several rides, the few that we got in, yeah, you could see that children were thriving on that independence. One particular young man, especially.
Can I speak again? Sorry. Also, there's a couple of children I would class as challenging behaviour, and I think because they didn't have the people around them giving the attention, they focused better on me teaching them. Is that fair, Sandra?
Yes, I would say probably.
That was something I was wondering about. If groups have got students who come who perhaps are normally do exhibit more challenging behaviour, and perhaps that gives them challenges to do with social distancing or that more unpredictable side of things. Would that be something where that student you wouldn't consider would be appropriate to come at the moment, or how would you deal with that sort of situation, either of you?
So I would still allow those children to go riding if we felt that we'd got the staff that could deal with it. So we have within our Ashmount RDA group, we very much work with school sorts out and deals with the pupils, and the volunteers, RDA volunteers, work with the horses and ponies, and we don't cross over a lot other than in the teaching, and obviously in the sidewalking. But so if there's ever any medical issues or behavioural issues, then it would be school staff straight away who would deal with those issues. And the teacher always, who's in charge from school, always makes sure that they go into that they're with the riders. And I know that Nick certainly went into the arena, and I believe he actually did sidewalk with one of the students. Yeah. But I think it's back to that thing, you know, we told the students before, we prepared them and told them before they went riding that, you know, they had got to step up, that they did need to be responsible, that they were very fortunate because they'd been given this opportunity again. They were the only group that were going to be riding. They were the only group that was going out of school on the minibus at the time. So you know, they were very much told that they were privileged, and if they didn't behave appropriately, they would lose the privilege. And I think, you know, for most children, especially when they're enthusiastic about the activity that they're going to do, you know, they rein themselves in and yeah, step up to the mark.
Well, that's great to hear. Ed, sorry, have we got?
So I was just going to say, Dawn's question, just to be really clear. So the leaders, were they part of the school team, or were they part of your volunteer team?
The leaders are the Ashmount RDA volunteers. It was just we had 2 side helpers. One was a teacher and one was a TA from school.
Right. And just to clarify, Sandra, back to you, with the age range of the children, students who were actually involved?
So we take upper Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 children. So I think the actual group that went this time were Key Stage 3, so they were 11 to 14-year-olds.
Right. Brilliant. It's a really
Great.
inspiring description of what's happened.
I think that wraps it up. We've done very well for time. That just leaves me to thank you, Sandra, very, very much for sharing your experiences of doing that. I hope people will find that inspiring. And if you have got any questions about anything that Sandra has raised this evening, do please feel free to email any questions to me. That's cward@rda.org.uk. Thank you very, very much to you, Dawn, for giving up your time this evening to support us with that. That's been great. And to you, Ed. And I very much hope that you will be joining us next Thursday when we are talking about inspirational fundraising. So thank you for joining us this evening, and I wish you a good evening.